and welcome to what is episode 1 of the DisruptED podcast for 2024. Now, today we have an absolutely salubrious guest, esteemed educator, Bali Haque, who is joining us for a quick chat. Bali, over to you. How are you going?
I'm very good, thank you, Claire. I'm good to let me come on your program. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Fantastic. And for the sake of our listeners, those who haven't been around as long as some of us might not be quite so aware of your history in the education scene in New Zealand, can you tell people a little bit about your background, where you've come from, and what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I'm getting a bit old in the tooth, really, Claire. It's the trouble. So, look, for those of you who don't know, I was born in Pakistan. I came to New Zealand as an adult. Got into secondary schools, became a principal of 4 schools, one of them in Cook Islands. Then went and worked for NZQA for a few years on the NCA front, did some work there, and then did some work for the ministry. We did the review of Tomorrow's Schools for Chris Hipkins. And I've carried on doing a few odds and ends. Currently, I'm New Plymouth District Councillor, so I'm getting into the beast of local politics, which is another beast and a half, but maybe a different subject at a different time.
You kicked off last year. So did you get in the elections last year?
I did, yeah.
Wow. You know how to keep yourself busy, don't you?
Well, you got to, haven't you?
So you recently wrote a bit of an op-ed about our school system and also about the challenges we have, I think, with our political system and the way that education is led or potentially not led in Aotearoa, and this idea that it's often too big a challenge for politicians and governments to tackle the system-wide change that is needed. And there's always this temptation for politicians and for the ministry to seem to err on the side of sort of quick fixes. And as you talked about silver bullets, do you want to tell us a little bit about your thinking and what you covered in that piece?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And you know, I should repeat really that, you know, I'm getting pretty old in the tooth, and I haven't been in a secondary school for a long time, so I need to be upfront about that. But my observations, particularly when we were doing the review for Chris Hipkins, one of the things that really struck me was it was the State Services Commissioner, as it was called then, comment around the system, and the big failure was the inability to scale up reform. So, you know, I saw something in the papers just recently, you know, School A turns round, fantastic work being done, and so on and so forth. And we got lots of that. We got lots of great things happening in our schools, but we can't scale them up systemically. And I think that's the big issue. And because of that, you know, because of the system we've got where the ministry's role is in doubt, is confused, because that's the way we set it up. And as a result, we tend to have a bit of a distrustful relationship sometimes. That because we have that inability to scale up, and the role of the ministry is not clear and the role of schools is not clear, we can't scale up. And that creates a whole barrage of reform. That didn't work, we'll do this. That didn't work, we'll do that. And I sort of feel that we're caught in that trap now. And the pity of it, I think, is that the schools and the principals and the boards are sort of complicit in that process as well, because they don't want to change the system where some schools are doing quite well. And they feel that there's some autonomy and there's a community spirit and all of those great things, local democracy. But I think that the problem is, I think the system itself is creating real cracks, and we won't succeed until we look at it systems wide.
Yeah, I remember so clearly when your Tomorrow's Schools recommendations came out, and I got pulled onto a couple of interviews on TV and interviews on radio in response to those very loud, connected groups of principals who suddenly spoke up because they thought their ability to self-govern was somehow going to be in question if we centralised control of some elements of our school. And I remember being so upset at the missed opportunity we have to fundamentally change. And I got really frustrated at what felt like, from the outside looking in, a lack of courage on the then minister's part to really make changes that might be deemed unpopular by particularly loud leaders of large successful schools.
I suppose, I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge that the task force, we wrote to Chris Hipkins twice. We saw him once. We talked to Jan Tinetti. We contacted Iona during that period where the final report, or a diluted final report, had been accepted, and we were happy with that given the political situation. And the difficulty was, it wasn't just the ministers who lost courage. I think the other problem was the ministry. It's not critical of the ministry, because I think there's some fantastic people there. The ministry failed in its implementation process as well. So what we've ended up doing, is actually adding to the problems of schools now. It's really sad. Really
things become increasingly, when you're not willing to dismantle a system as a whole and rebuild it from the ground up, it can't be anything other than a Frankenstein, because it becomes additive and additive and additive. And, it's only now that I feel like, through the very hard work of some very good people, that the NZC refresh is starting to, make a little bit of sense. And the fact that the NCEA updates, they had the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, sorry, and everything was all the wrong way around, and they were trying to do NCA refresh and then an NZC refresh and so on and so forth. And I often come back and wonder, I've been someone like you that hasn't ever sort of shied away from sharing my views and opinions, but I've also got to the point where I've sort of nearly exhausted myself in speaking up and speaking out a bit. So you tend to just put your head down and get back into the trenches and do what you do at a local level. Because what I've noticed more and more, and I don't know how we solve this problem, is, with our most recent elections and incoming minister, they're really open about the fact that they're not even looking to meet the needs of schools and school leaders. They're looking to basically gain votes by pushing things through that are popular, because they are seemingly sensible, simple solutions to what we actually know as school leaders are fundamentally complex societal problems.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I did a SPANS conference not long ago. I was asked to speak there. My question to the principal, I don't think it went down very well, to be honest. My question to the secondary principals was actually, who is there in this current environment that is calling this out? And because the journos aren't, because they don't necessarily know, and they have their political perspectives. I don't think the unions are, because, I'm not necessarily being critical, but that's not what they're doing. The teachers in general are work to death. They don't have the time to do it. So nobody's calling this out. And I had a sort of thought that if school principals were able to be united around this issue, around the politicization of education, put it that way, and the silver bullet approach, then if school principals were able to speak out in some sort of unified voice, that would be powerful. But we don't seem to be able to do that.
No, and there does seem to be, within the context of, I'm obviously in the secondary leadership space, a bit of a polarization in where people stand. It's quite interesting. I often get painted as this sort of lefty, liberal, person that's doing outlandish things. But then and then you've got people at the other end of the spectrum that are seen as, very traditional, focusing on knowledge-rich curriculum, maybe looking to IB and Cambridge as your thing, and talking a lot about rigor. But at the end of the day, I think both of us, both groups at either end of the spectrum, at the heart of hearts, we care deeply about designing a curriculum and a way of delivering learning that we believe is right for the community that we're serving. So whilst our ways of doing it, like in Parliament, you might have a National Party, a Labour Party, or a right, let's face it, we're all pretty centrist really, but, you might have different leaning. So I think we need to find a way to become unified that isn't threatening individual principals standing by what it is that they do and how they do it. Like, I think there's space for us to have, it's interesting, isn't it? There's that real tension between, and I know you talked about this a little bit in your article about the fact that we're so self-governing, there's no sort of consistency of what schools are delivering. And Nina Hood recently wrote a paper that looked at the fact that there's so little consistency that you've got no guarantee of, the important things being covered off. And I go back and forth in my belief that I think there has to be a base level of stuff that we all agree is absolutely important and that we're going to fight for, but there can also be room for different flavours of leadership in schools as well. Sorry, I'm talking myself around.
No, it's the classic centralisation, local, it's the balance. It's getting that autonomy versus central control, getting that right. And I think the
Tomorrow Schools cracked that.
That's
the
right.
Tomorrow School report, like, I didn't see anything in there that stopped Westlake Boys being Westlake Boys, Albany Senior being Albany Senior, whatever school you pick around the country. There was nothing in that report, that set of recommendations that would have prevented all of us continuing on in the journeys that we're on.
And yet, it's interesting. I mean, two thoughts come to mind. One is that what we failed to do with that devolution and all the positives, we failed to provide good wraparound services for teachers and principals in terms of what we asked them to do. And that's, to me, absolutely disgraceful, that what we've ended up doing, particularly principals, and we know the workload of principals, and principals in a way are their most worst enemy because they sort of like it. But actually, we have dumped so much on principals that leadership, I think, has become a real issue in schools. And my point, I suppose, is schools. See, I don't know whether initial teacher education or even a curriculum review is going to crack this. I'm sort of coming to the view that those things are important. But unless schools as organisations are functioning well, the culture of schools is about learning and improving, and the relationship between schools is positive. Unless those organisations we call schools have good leadership structures, good ways of supporting their people, we're not going to do it.
No.
We aren't going to do it. And so the question I have is, where are those backup wraparound services? And I can't, they're ad hoc, and they tend to be arbitrary depending on what cycle we're in. So fundamentally, I suppose my question is around what can principals, trying to be positive, what can principals be talking about with the new minister about this issue? Because it seems to me there's an opportunity here with the new minister. And I've got a bit of time for Erica Stanford. I've heard her speak. She has her political box to be in. But is it possible now we can start talking to Erica Stanford about these systems issues? And couldn't it be? I'm not of a political persuasion, but I can see real possibilities in somebody like Erica Stanford picking up some of these big issues.
Yeah.
When she's done the phones and all that sort of stuff, and actually trying to address the issues that are deep rooted.
I remember some of those round tables that they had with school leaders, and I don't know if they were popular or not, and I don't know how effective they were back in Minister Parata's days, and that'll be a trigger for some people. But there were those great big meetings that we had down in Wellington that had principals at round tables with ministry reps sitting on the round tables and actually having some of those robust discussions. I think something like that would be a really good start in the first instance, to at least have some discussions around it. And yes, they did get heated sometime, but that's okay. That's part of the discourse. But I mean, considering we've got a mixture of maybe school leaders and teachers listening to us, if they're still listening at this point in time, what if you were in their shoes this year? So we know that there's stuff that's being rolled out in the first 100 days. And for the most part, it's really quite benign. Saying, an hour of reading, writing and maths, my goodness, I don't know a school that doesn't do that anyway. The cell phone ban is what it is. Quite frankly, I'm not losing sleep over that or sweating buckets over that. We'll just do what we can with it. So in some ways, we haven't got a government or a ministry that's tasked with blowing everything up. Like, things are what they are, and we can carry on for the most part as we have been doing for the last few years. If you were going to give advice to your young self, if you were a teacher or you're a school leader at this very moment, what would you be doing? What would you be prioritizing? What would you be thinking about?
You mean in the individual school that I'm leading?
Yeah, like if you were back as a principal today, or even further back if you were back as a teacher in this particular context, what's the best thing we can do?
Oh, look, I mean, everyone knows the answer. I mean, I suppose I come back to the organisation of the school, and I don't mean the technical organisation. I mean the culture of the organisation that I'm trying to lead, and it actually, it's not that hard, is it?
No.
I mean, the difficulty is you can get into negative modes, and you can say the ministry that's doing that, I don't like that. The minister's doing that, I don't like that. And my board's not working. But actually, there are real possibilities of leadership in organisations. And if I were my young self, I'd be saying, you need in that organisation, you need to get on with leading and doing and looking at the culture of the organisation.
Yeah.
I would also be saying fervently that you are not an island. And you need to be working with other schools in your area, and you need to be influencing, because you are important. You are one of the few leaders in this country looking after our children. And so you need to commit to a systems-wide approach, which is, I think, where we fell down quite early on with Tomorrow's Schools. What's good for our kids and our system across the board, and then working to achieve that. And that's not easy. There will be disagreements about that, but it needs to be upfront, and it needs to be debated. It's not about, to me hiding in my school and making it good, because that doesn't
and
work.
It's not I'd love to see us getting past, although I don't think it's too bad necessarily, but the whole competitive sort of side of schools. There's nothing to be gained competing with your neighbouring school, competing with community schools. We're here to serve young people of Aotearoa, end of story, and whoever comes through our doors, who we're looking after.
Look, absolutely. And it's not about competition, it's about having the frame, if you like, to think like that. Because I think we got into a bad habit as school leaders to think in terms of my organisation and how what they're doing is affecting me. Yeah. I think that's the other thing I would say, and we're probably close to 20 minutes, but the other thing that I just want to chuck in, if you ask me what would the advice be to, say, the minister, one of the things that's really struck me is how we are not good at monitoring how good our system is. The PISA results come out, and we all have
the deficit theorising of the system is huge, isn't it? Because it makes good headlines.
Yeah, but have we agreed what success looks like? And do we have data once we've got somewhere? We never agree entirely, but it seems to me that even ERO, when you ask ERO how's the system performing, they will come up with slices of stuff that they have done some surveys on, and I have questions about their methodologies. But ultimately, that's not good enough. Then we've got NCA results. They're problematic in terms of systems performance, I think. PISA, we've got the NEMP stuff that's going on. We've got the ministry collecting information about bullying and suspensions, and all that sort of stuff is all around. But actually, it seems to me we need to have some organisation that is neutral, that is apolitical, that is actually gathering information about how the system is performing and making recommendations. And I think that's right down to things like how you do the curriculum, because at the moment, the refresh, in my view, it's maybe getting on track, but it's been pretty ad hoc.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that it seems to me there's a big chunk missing, that we were running around trying to fix stuff. I mean, the PISA results, there needs to be a good debate about how useful they are. We don't seem to have it.
No, there's a bit of a blind acceptance that, we're declining and that's it. We're all going to hell in a handbasket, where there's a whole, and the other thing that I get concerned about as well is that I feel like somewhere along the way, and there's a whole lot of reasons for the last few years with a pandemic and everything that's gone on, that we've stopped those futures thinking type conversations. We had some really exciting conversations about, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where NZQA was going on about the anywhere, anytime assessment and how we're going to become, this agile system with responsive assessment opportunities. And then it just very quietly did a U-turn, ground to a halt, and, and it's like we're all pretending that conversation never happened. That we're all just mutually agreeing to pretend that we never had that as a goal. So I would also love, alongside that sort of impartial body that's actually can sort of measure the effectiveness of the system and make some recommendations, are also looking to the future as well in terms of how we could be evolving the system, because we seem to have lost any of that sort of aspirational discourse, like even on the front of how we're engaging with technologies to enable, different models of education. That those conversations have dried up. It's like they've,
Why do you think that is, Claire? Is it just because nobody's leading them, or is it workload? What is it?
I think it's those two things combined. And I've often been really interested in New Zealand's model, that we do not have any one person leading the education system. Like you look to our, Secretary for Education, and they're very much the Secretary for Education. They're not the leader of the Ministry of Education. And we know that the Minister of Education is serving a party. There's no figurehead in New Zealand of someone who is an aspirational leader of education. And I think that's a shame as well.
It is. And that business about an impartial, I mean, whatever you call it, but somebody or something that we can respect as being apolitical, that is engendering a discussion and a debate and providing us with information and setting a direction, which, I mean, that gets over to some extent the party political stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not hard. I mean, it's not hard.
Yeah.
We were asking Chris Hipkins to do that. And it was, I think they lost the political courage to take on stuff. But it's,
Okay, I'm aware that we're at the very doing what we said we wouldn't do, which was to keep talking and talking and talking. So in closing, Bali, our recommendation is thinking about leaders not being an island, schools not being an island, to connect up. You also said earlier on that courage to speak out. Do you just want to finish up talking about how people might actually speak out a bit more as well? Because I think we've run out of steam on that front, and we've got to really make sure we don't let that silence us.
Yeah, and I think that if you're looking, I mean, I think we can. There's some work to do with the principals' organisations, but regardless of that, I mean, there are meetings with the minister that take place all the time. I'd love to see principals asking the minister questions like that, rather than questions around what do you do about cell phones. Let's get on with that. Let's ask the minister some of those bigger questions, because I think potentially with the new minister, there's an opportunity to make. I mean, I don't care what party they come from anymore. Yeah. I think there's a potential here for us to ask the big questions and say, well, what are you doing systemically? Because there's clearly a problem.
Yeah, I think I'd love our system to get back to being aspirational rather than reactionary. Yeah,
totally agree. And you can't be that if you're fighting fires all the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bali. Thank you for being our first guest for DisruptEd Podcast 2024. And to those of you, if you're still listening, if you've got anyone you'd love us to have a conversation with, or if you yourself would like to have a conversation on the DisruptEd podcast, please reach out below. So in closing, thank you so much, Bali. Have a fantastic afternoon. What were you getting back to? You were doing croissants.
Croissants. Yeah.
Okay. So, you get back to the important business of baking, and we shall get back to the important business of teaching our young people. Have an absolutely fantastic afternoon.
Bye.
Happy day.
Happy day.